This is Behind the Verdict. I'm John Horford with Myrene Cook, and today we're going to talk about a case that Myrene has wanted to talk about since we started discussing starting a podcast, and I don't think I've seen her as excited as when I told her that the next case that we should do is the O.J. Simpson case. So just to give a little reminder for people, a brief overview. The O.J. Simpson case is one of the most high-profile criminal trials in American history, drawing international attention. It involves the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman, and the subsequent trial of former football star O.J. Simpson as the prime suspect. The case became a spectacle of media frenzy, celebrity culture, racial tensions, legal strategies, and the public's fascination with Simpson himself.
O.J. Simpson, a former professional football player, became a popular figure in American culture, known for his athletic prowess, commercials, and acting career. He was married to Nicole Brown Simpson in 1985, but their relationship was tumultuous, marked by allegations of domestic violence and infidelity. They divorced in 1992, but Simpson reportedly continued to be possessive and jealous, leading to ongoing conflicts.
Nicole Brown Simpson, a 35-year-old mother of two, had a history of trying to escape the abusive relationship, but was often drawn back due to Simpson's behavior. On the night of June 12, 1994, both Nicole and Ron were brutally murdered outside of Nicole's condominium in Brentwood, Los Angeles.
On June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found dead outside of her home. Nicole's body was discovered lying at the base of the stairs, and Ron's body was found several feet away. Both victims had been brutally stabbed, with Nicole suffering multiple deep wounds to her neck and head, and Ron being similarly attacked.
The murders appeared to be a targeted, violent attack. The crime scene was described as a bloody and chaotic mess, which suggested that the killer was enraged or possibly knew the victims. The brutality and the fact that both victims were killed in close proximity raised suspicions of a personal motive. A bloody glove was found at the scene of the murders, which would later become crucial evidence in the trial.
In the immediate aftermath of the murders, O.J. Simpson became a suspect. His history of abusive behavior toward Nicole, as well as his proximity to the crime scene, made him a prime candidate. The police initially tried to locate him for questioning. At first, Simpson was nowhere to be found, and he was reported to have fled.
On June 17, 1994, Simpson's arrest became one of the most widely broadcast events in American television history. In a bizarre and unprecedented event, Simpson led police on a slow-speed chase in a white Ford Bronco, driven by his friend Al Cowlings, while television networks aired the chase live. This spectacle captivated the nation and was broadcast to millions of viewers.
Simpson eventually turned himself in, and he was formally charged with 2 counts of murder. The police also found a plethora of evidence linking him to the crime, including the bloody glove at the scene, a bloody glove at his house, and blood traces found on Simpson's clothing and his vehicle.
The trial, which began in 1995, was dubbed the trial of the century due to its massive media attention and the celebrity status of the defendant. It took place in the Los Angeles County Superior Court and lasted nearly a year. The case was presided over by Judge Lance Ito, with Marsha Clark and Christopher Darden representing the prosecution, and Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, F. Lee Bailey, and Alan Dershowitz representing the defense.
The prosecution's argument centered on the idea that Simpson had the motive, means, and opportunity to commit the murders. They highlighted his history of domestic violence against Nicole, as well as his behavior leading up to the murders. Some of the key points the prosecution made included:
2 gloves were found at the crime scene, one at Nicole's home and one at the Simpson property. The prosecution argued that these gloves were a key piece of evidence that connected Simpson to the crime.
Blood traces were found at the scene of the murder, in Simpson's car, at his home, on some of his clothing. The prosecution argued that the blood evidence showed Simpson's guilt and that he had been at the crime scene.
They suggested Simpson was motivated by jealousy and anger over his failed marriage to Nicole. Domestic violence records and testimonies from former friends and family members painted Simpson as a controlling and abusive individual.
The infamous low-speed Bronco chase was seen by the prosecution as evidence of Simpson's guilt. He appeared to be fleeing from justice, raising suspicions of his involvement in the murders.
The defense, led by Johnny Cochran, argued that Simpson was being framed for the murders. They suggested that the evidence against him was circumstantial and that it had been mishandled by the police. Some key elements of the defense included:
Johnny Cochran focused on the idea that the Los Angeles Police Department had a history of racial bias, particularly against African Americans. He argued that Detective Mark Furman, one of the officers who handled evidence in the case, had a history of using racial slurs and was biased. Furman's testimony about finding key evidence was severely damaged, as it had been revealed he had used the N-word and made racial statements.
Perhaps the most iconic moment of the trial occurred when Simpson was asked to try on the bloody glove that had been found at the scene of the crime. Simpson struggled to put the glove on, and his defense attorneys famously shouted, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." This moment became a pivotal point in the trial, casting doubt on the prosecution's evidence and leading many to believe that the glove was too small for Simpson's hand.
The defense also argued that the evidence had been mishandled and contaminated, casting doubt on the integrity of the entire investigation. They contended that the police had planted the evidence to frame Simpson, creating reasonable doubt. After a lengthy trial and hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict on October 3, 1995. O.J. Simpson was acquitted of the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. The verdict was met with widespread reactions, with many celebrating it as a triumph for Simpson, while others felt that justice had been denied.
The case became deeply divided along racial lines, with many African Americans believing Simpson was the victim of racist police conspiracies, while many white Americans believed he had gotten away with murder.
While Simpson was acquitted of the murders in the criminal case, his legal troubles did not end there. In 1997, a civil court found Simpson liable for the wrongful deaths of Nicole and Ron, and he was ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages to the victims' families.
In 2007, Simpson was arrested and convicted for his involvement in an armed robbery in Las Vegas. He was sentenced to 33 years in prison and served 9 before being granted parole in 2017.
The O.J. Simpson case marks a landmark event in American history, not just for its tragic outcome, but for how it exposed racial, social, and legal divisions in the country. The trial's impact continues to be felt today, with documentaries, books, movies, and discussions about the case still dominating popular culture and media.
Right before we started this episode, you were talking about how you were in law school while this case was on TV, and you were actually in law school in Lansing. And the news or newspaper, they were going around and asking law students what they thought of the case, and the vast majority of students refused to talk with them and to give them any attention or to answer this. But one law student wanted to make it known exactly how she felt regarding the case. And you were that law student.
One law student was someone who was thinking she wanted to be a prosecutor and watched this case from beginning to end on court TV, watched it between classes, watched the clips again after classes, followed it as much as humanly possible. And I think it was the newspaper who wanted quotes on what we as law students thought about what was happening in the trial, about whether or not he was guilty, and all of those types of things. And yes, I was the law student we're talking about. I gave my opinion. I felt he was absolutely, positively, 100% guilty, and the trial hadn't even concluded yet.
Why did you feel so strongly that he was guilty?
Because I listened to the evidence, I looked at what they were doing, and I looked at it with a fresh set of eyes going into my law school career, trying to figure out all of the things I wanted to be, to become a prosecutor, to do the right thing for the right reasons, to stand up for the victims in this case who no longer had a voice to do it themselves. And in looking at all of that evidence, I just couldn't imagine how the jury would not find him guilty.
But they did.
But they did. Yeah.
So I don't want to get too much into the specifics because I kind of want to save that for the next episode, unless you have better ideas. I wanted to talk about just sort of like the reaction of the country at the time. So you're in law school, as we mentioned in the overview, and just as a lot of people know, there seemed to be a belief that he was guilty or innocent that was pretty stark, on racial lines, right?
Yeah, it was. And I think it wasn't just race that divided the country on this. I think you also had to throw in the celebrity status. So O.J. Simpson was a star football player. I believe he played at USC when he was in college. He became a star football player in the NFL, and that transgressed into commercials. If people may remember, he did commercials for Hertz running through an airport trying to catch his airplane. He then became an actor, a beloved comedy actor, which seems a little far-fetched.
Because he's charismatic. Like, he's a good-looking guy.
He is.
He's
yeah.
I think he's better looking than Scott Peterson, and you said that Scott Peterson was very handsome.
Okay, well, what I will say is, yes, OJ was very handsome. He was very charismatic. He was very also manipulative.
Yes. It's funny. I don't know if this is true or if this is just like a rumor that's in like pop culture, but OJ was originally who they wanted to cast as the Terminator, but nobody believed the director was like, or someone told the director, no one would believe that OJ is like a cold-blooded murderer. We have to get someone like Arnold.
Well, that's foreshadowing, isn't it?
It's interesting, right? I don't know if that's true or not. I've heard that before.
Okay, I don't think he could have been the Terminator, but that's a whole nother story on a whole nother episode.
Wait, why?
I just don't think he had the acting ability.
They said he seemed too nice, but Arnold did.
Arnold acted more like...
He was like a robot. He
acted more like a robot.
Yeah, he was too charismatic to be the Terminator. He was too nice to be the Terminator. No one believed... That's like the point. Like, no one believed... No one would believe that OJ would be the Terminator. He's too charismatic. He's too likable.
Not what I would say, but...
He's too likable.
We'll go back to, yes, he was handsome. Yes, he was charismatic. Yes, he could manipulate people into seeing things the way he wanted to see them.
Yeah.
But I do think that the country was very divided racially on this case. You know, this was one of the first cases where a celebrity was going on trial for, let's be honest, these were brutal murders. I mean, Nicole was stabbed multiple times. She was nearly decapitated. The scene was incredibly bloody. Ron was stabbed multiple times in multiple places as well. And it appeared to be the work of one person.
Yeah.
Doing all of this. And so, but this was a case where you had O.J. Simpson was an African-American male, and he had married Nicole Brown, who was a Caucasian female. And I think maybe there were still some people at the time who weren't sure about how that worked out, weren't sure about if that was okay or not okay in society. And so I think that played into it. And I think the race card, that's really where I heard that one of the first times being used in a case like this, in a murder case, where people really thought that came into play.
But you don't think that it did at all? Like, even with Furman, for example, using the N-word and things of that nature, do you think someone who uses that word openly isn't someone who's racist, and that person isn't biased in their opinions?
I think that person could be biased in their opinions. I think using that word, first of all, is entirely inappropriate. It is wrong on so many levels, and I can't say that enough. However, Furman was not one of the lead detectives on this case. In fact, he went to the scene initially, and the other two detectives, Van Adder and Lang, were the ones from the homicide division who came in and took over from Furman. So Furman's actual work on this case was minor in the beginning. He did find some things. He did find some evidence. He's pointing to evidence in photos, but it was clearly documented in the photos. And not to get into the weeds on this, but when he used the N-word and the areas where they claimed he was racially biased, he had been talking to someone, and I don't remember if it was a writer or a producer or someone who was working on developing a storyline for a cop show or something else. And they recorded him talking about cases, recorded him talking about how it might be seen, how a cop might be seen, and basically developing this storyline. So was it something he truly thought? Was it something he was playing as this character? I mean, either way, I don't think it's appropriate.
Yeah.
But if it was more along the lines of he was developing this character for a storyline.
You think it was taken out of context to some degree?
I think the entire damn trial was taken out of context. I'm going to be honest with you. I think it is a defense attorney's job, and they were very effective in this case, to throw out red herrings. We look at that a red herring is something you throw out to say, look at the shiny thing I have over here, and let me distract you from the real evidence in this case, from the DNA, from the eyewitness testimony, from all of the other mountains and mountains of evidence that point to O.J. Simpson and only O.J. Simpson.
Yep.
I think that the defense was very, very good at their job in this case, and they pointed at Furman. They pointed at a lapse in police. They pointed at bias by them. They pointed at everything and anything they could that deflected what really happened. They deflected from the fact that their client was a stone cold-blooded killer who murdered two people, and in his mind, if he couldn't have Nicole, no one could, and he happened to kill somebody who appeared to be at Nicole's house that night doing a good deed, returning a set of glasses her mother had left at the restaurant where Ron Goldman worked.
You can assume that he was thinking that they were having an affair of some kind, and in a jealous rage sort of acted out. It was extremely violent. I mean, you said Nicole was almost, decapitated.
Yes. Now, one of the things we need to focus on, too, and talk about is that while they may have divorced in 1992, they had several attempts to get back together that had failed. But the last one that they had failed within a month and a half of her death. Like they were trying to get back together, trying to put their family back together, and he had done something, once again, that proved to her he hadn't changed. He was still manipulative. He was still a violent individual. This had been documented numerous times in prior domestic violence calls, prior 911 calls from her, with him coming to the house, breaking down the door, doing all kinds of things. But she finally told him about a month or so before her death, she was done. OJ, we're not getting back together. It is done. And while he had a different girlfriend on the side already, the fact that Nicole told him, no, I'm calling it, probably pissed him off to no end. That very night, they had a dance recital for their daughter, Sydney. This was going to be the very first family event with Nicole, her kids, her parents, her sisters and their families that OJ was not a part of. He was excluded. So while he did go to the recital, he didn't sit with them. And they made plans to go out for dinner and celebrate Sydney's amazing performance at this dance recital. OJ was not invited to dinner. Now imagine you are a controlling, narcissistic, manipulative asshole who's been violent with your ex. She's now told you she doesn't want you back. You're not getting back together. She's taken that control away from you. And now she's thrown it in your face that she's going out to dinner with her family to celebrate, and you're not invited.
Yeah, and we know what happens next.
Exactly.
So one of the things that continues to come up is if all this evidence is pointing towards OJ being guilty, how does he get off? And I know that we want to get into more of the details of that and just your opinion as a prosecutor, but does representation matter so much that with a great defense team, you can get away with anything almost?
It's not a great defense team. Do you remember what they were called?
No.
They were called the Dream Team. The Dream Team.
So just beyond that.
So not only did they have the names we listed, they had Johnny Cochran, they had F. Lee Bailey. F. Lee Bailey was an amazing defense attorney. He was just one of the preeminent defense attorneys in the state.
Yeah.
They had Robert Kardashian. They had others on there as well. But the one name that we didn't list, they also had Barry Scheck. And Barry Scheck was an expert in DNA analysis, and there were not many of them. That's why they called him in to help with this case.
But did he lie or did he tell the truth?
Who? Barry Scheck?
Yeah.
He didn't lie, but he manipulated enough to know what to argue and what not to argue.
Got you. So he just conveniently left some things out or worded things in a way that's beneficial towards OJ and the defense.
They were very effective defense attorneys, and they did their job very well.
So they weren't good. They were the best.
They were the best. They were the dream team.
And that makes a massive difference. So representation really can make all the difference.
It can.
In a case.
It can. You can buy your way out of a murder charge.
Yeah.
That's what he did.
No question.
No question. I have absolutely no doubts OJ did this.
Because we're not going to talk about it in the next episode, is there no other potential possibility? There's no other theory that it could be like, who were they trying to convince people that it was?
They were trying to say it was a drug deal gone bad, that Nicole had.
Because she did have a history of like doing like party drugs, and
she had a friend who had a history of doing those types of things.
Yeah.
Whether or not Nicole actually participated in it or not, we don't know.
Okay.
A lot of the things that were floated out there about Nicole and her being promiscuous and wild and partying were floated by OJ and his team. Why would you do that? You want to smear the victim. You want to taint how the public sees her.
And even if she did do, party drugs and was promiscuous, I mean, that still doesn't mean that she deserves to die.
How does that matter?
Yeah,
does she deserve to be almost decapitated?
Exactly.
And murdered in a home where her children are sleeping upstairs and could have come down the stairs any minute and saw it, found it, or seen her?
Because she likes ecstasy and cocaine.
Right.
Like, yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
I agree. So representation really does matter.
It does matter. And in this case, he bought the best. And they came up with so many things that I think as a prosecutor, I just can't fathom not objecting more. I think the prosecution team did a lot of things the right way. I think they were trying to figure out, and I think they wholeheartedly believed he did it. But there were a few missteps here and there along the way as well. And
then to also convince the jury, I mean, do we know we don't know what the final vote was, do we?
You never get a final vote, but in this case, it has to be unanimous that they all voted one way or the other.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And this is a little pet peeve of mine.
Why do I always forget that it has to be unanimous? That feels weird that it has to be unanimous.
Oh, it has to be unanimous in a criminal case.
Is that weird? Like, I understand it being like a majority or even like maybe like 70%, but
it has to be unanimous. Can you imagine? Let's assemble. And so they had alternates on this case, and I can't remember how many, but in a standard case, you have 12 jurors, and on most cases, you'll call in 2 or 3 alternates, but you don't know who an alternate is.
Yeah.
So let's just round it up. You have 18 people sitting there listening to this trial. This trial lasted for a year. These jurors were sequestered from their families.
So in hotels. Not allowed to engage, watch TV.
They couldn't watch TV. They couldn't read the newspaper.
Torturous.
And they could see their families for visiting hours only.
Like they were prisoners.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so it has to be unanimous, and the jury came back. But my pet peeve is this. This case and others where the defendants got away with it, people say they were found not guilty. That is outright, absolute bullshit. They weren't found not guilty. They were acquitted of the charges, because it doesn't mean the jury found them not guilty. It just means they didn't believe beyond a reasonable doubt that the burden of proof was met by the prosecution. Now, does that sound very technical? Absolutely, it does. But this comes from my 25 plus years experience as a prosecutor, when I've had cases and a jury comes back, not guilty, it's acquitted. Okay, I'm correcting myself. That I go back and I talk to the jury. Okay, what did you think and why? And more often than not, that jury would say, well, we believed that it happened. We believed they probably did it, but we just didn't believe it beyond a reasonable doubt, and we couldn't agree on that.
Yeah.
So imagine you get 18, 17 of your closest friends together. You all have to listen to this for a year, go through everything. You're listening to DNA that sounds probably like a lot of just foreign language because nobody understood DNA.
Yeah, it was new.
Not even the attorneys very well, right? And you have to ultimately agree unanimously.
And that's why I think it's crazy that it has to be unanimous. And of course, we're dealing with people's lives and, taking away people's freedom, or, potentially even a state like California, death penalty at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, potentially even putting someone on death row. So, I mean, of course, you want to be very, very certain
and
that the person's guilty.
This is a beloved character that people grew up watching play football, watching on their TV.
That was way too nice to be
handsome guy. Don't even start being too nice. That is not the point.
Way too nice to be the Terminator.
Yeah, well.
I'm just, you let it out.
Yeah, you're just baiting me is
no,
what you're doing.
I would never do that. Right, Alex? We would never do that. We'd never do that.
But, we all know my opinion, 100% absolute positive guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, no questions asked. What's your opinion?
It all seems to be pointing towards that OJ absolutely was the person who murdered Nicole. The chase, the evidence, the blood on his car. I mean, I guess we can talk about more of this stuff, in the next episode. I mean, it all seems to the history of jealousy. I was going to ask something about domestic violence actually earlier. And I'm very curious, even in the state of Michigan, related to this case, but in the state of Michigan in general, why when a police officer is called to a home and there's a domestic violence case, and then the person sort of says, I don't want to press charges, can you not still arrest the person who has been violent towards the victim?
Little known fact, it is not the victim of a crime that ever presses the charges, ever. It is the prosecutor's office on behalf of the people of the state of Michigan.
Okay.
So sometimes victims will be asked, what do you want to see happen? And they will say, well, I don't want him to go to jail. I don't want charges pressed. But you got to understand the dynamics in domestic violence have gone on probably longer than just that one night. They may start with subtle things that are more manipulation. It may be isolation. It may be a lot of different things. It may be financial. It may be controlling of the kids. There may have been prior acts of violence in domestic violence cases. And the national average for a domestic violence survivor to actually leave that relationship is that they are abused at least 7 times before they will actually leave and leave for good. So in looking at this case, Nicole had called the police multiple times. He had been arrested at least a couple of those times, and he kept getting away with it. He kept getting out of it. He never really had strong, major consequences.
So that means that she did not actually want to press charges or get the prosecutor's office to press charges on behalf of her for whatever reason.
She may have said, I don't want to cooperate. I'm going to get back with him. He promised me it will never happen again. We used to call that the cycle of violence and the honeymoon phase. But
you don't have to arrest somebody for being for literally hurting another individual in a very, in a damaging way. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be like catastrophic or anything, but even just like hitting someone, you don't have to arrest that individual and take them to jail.
You should.
But you don't have to.
You should.
But seriously,
the law actually says nowadays, and keep in mind this was back in 1994, so laws have changed since then. But nowadays, the parties in a situation involving domestic violence aren't left together. The law says you will do something.
So, in theory, I also bring it up, and this is unrelated to the OJ case, but I wanted to try to get an answer for the state of Michigan because, I know of a family friend who has a partner who abuses her horribly, and the police have been called by the family on numerous occasions. He has never been arrested for that.
Well, it also could be a factor when the police arrive there. She may not give a statement.
Exactly. Yeah, she
Right?
never wants to. She never. Yeah, but
So without proof that there was something that happened, okay, without proof.
But an individual, like the family, saying, we literally just witnessed this person punch her in the face. We literally just witnessed this person throw her down the stairs.
If you have an independent eyewitness, I would look at that very strongly and say, we need to charge this. Even if the victim came forward and said, please don't, I don't want you to, I would say, you know what, my job and my duty is to protect you and the rest of society. So even if you broke up with him and said you were done, this is going to go on with somebody else, and we need to stop that before it escalates even more.
Absolutely. But they don't have to, because they clearly didn't in the case, of the family friend. And they clearly didn't with Nicole Brown Simpson either. And they knew that he was being violent with her.
Well, she might not have cooperated. And again, that was back in 1994.
But she called the police.
She did.
And then when they got there, she just totally changed.
She could say that I no longer want to press charges. She could say that I don't want to come to court and testify. We've had victims in the past, even as little as last week in cases I've handled of domestic violence, where victims were cooperative at first, called the police, gave a statement, said all the things that the person did, and then it comes time for the first court hearing. They're subpoenaed. They know they're subpoenaed. They know if they don't show up, they could be subject to contempt of court, and they fail to show up. And if they don't show up and I can't prove it in any other way, shape, or form, the case gets dismissed.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I think that's a good place to leave off. What do we want to touch on in the next episode? We're going to get into some more details of the trial, some things that are going to drive Myrene just absolutely up a wall. The glove drives Myrene insane.
It does, and I think this is going to be a multiple segment case that we're going to analyze, because I think what we need to do is take it in pieces. We need to talk about the investigation and the evidence collection, and how that worked, and then I honestly think another episode is going to be the damn trial and everything that happened as a result of that.
Yeah.
And I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about the book that he wrote. It was titled
If I Did It, or
If I Did It.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Did you know the title was changed?
What was it originally?
It was If I Did It.
Oh.
And he wrote it along with a ghostwriter. And there is a chapter, I want to say it's chapter 8. We'll see if I'm right. But there's a chapter in there that he says, if I did it, this is how it would have come down, and this is how it would have happened. And he details horrific statements and comments and ways this could have happened.
Yeah.
Now, he lost control of that book after the civil case by the Goldman family against him and the Brown family. He lost control of the rights of the book and the money that came as a result of it. I was very adamant I wasn't going to buy the damn book if OJ was going to get the money for it.
But then once they got control, you bought the book
I bought the book to support the family. And do you know what the Goldmans did on the front cover of that? They took the word "if" that was really big and prominent on the front and made it minuscule and tiny. So when you look at the title of that book,
I Did It.
It says "I Did It," and there's a bloody footprint in the background of the cover of that book. So we have to talk about the book.
So you got to tune in to part 2, and Myrene is demanding part 3. And if you want part 3, we can have part 3. So
it'll have to be a part 3. There's too much to talk about.
There's too much to talk about. So tune in. You get to see Myrene worked up in a way that we haven't yet. We're all very excited about that. She's extremely passionate, demanding a part 3. That hasn't happened since the Andrea Bowman and Kathleen Doyle cases, which she was actually directly involved with, at least Andrea Bowman. So this is a big deal. So make sure you tune in. And if you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to us on our Instagram page or our TikTok at BTV_podcast. pod.
Tell us your thoughts on the OJ case and what you thought should have been different, could have been different, or what your thoughts were in general. Are they the same thoughts you had then, or have they changed over time?
Or do you think, especially if people think that he's innocent, but we'd love to hear some opinions that are like, no, OJ absolutely was framed, right?
Well, we would love to hear that, and I will help refute it.
If you're not afraid of Myrene, message us. Let us know if you think that he's innocent, and you can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.